Welcome to, or welcome back to, the Agatha May Detective Agency. I'm Agatha May, and in this episode, I'll be reading the essay of a woman who spent almost 2 years in a mental hospital during World War II. When I first came across this essay, I mistakenly thought that the woman who wrote it had been committed to the Kansas State Hospital at Osawatomie, but it was actually the Topeka, Kansas State Hospital. I also lied about Osawatomie being the first mental hospital west of the Mississippi. Now, there are numerous sources that state such, but it's actually the third oldest. Fulton, Missouri actually has the claim to fame of having the oldest hospital. The state hospital at Topeka was established in 1875 and was an answer to overcrowding at Osawatomie. The hospital closed in 1997, and the final building was demolished in 2010. There are numerous stories of abuse that occurred at Topeka, and I might end up making an episode about it. But in this episode, I'll be reading the essay, I Spent Almost 2 Years in the Insane Asylum. The essay was discovered in the spring of 1994 in the Kansas State Historical Society's records of the governor's office. It appears it was written to the governor in an effort to elicit reform at the hospital. The author is anonymous and all names have been changed to protect her identity. Changed by the Historical Society, not me. Since they used the name Pearl for her, that's what we'll call her. So here is Pearl's essay. During the war years, my husband Rick and younger son David were farming 40 acres, which was not much for two with a tractor. After considering and debating, he decided he would sub-rent the 40 and get a job at a war plant. He worked first in a powder plant, then he secured a job in a plane factory. He seemed quite satisfied at first with the high wages and was saving $100 each month. After he put in his time at the factory, he worked evenings at a filling station. However, I thought that too much work. He wished to continue and did. The older boy, Ronald, was in the Pacific on a heavy cruiser, which had been badly damaged by a torpedo. With the ship's bow gone, they made it to Pearl Harbor. He was given a 30-day leave and came home, spending most of the time traveling the distance. We continued to live on the 40 and had a flock of chickens. It was a misty, rainy Thanksgiving day. David and Rick shut corn until dark. After a good fried chicken supper, I was walking from the house to the well on a slanting and slippery walk when I fell and fractured my right wrist. It was night and I knew the doctors were not at their office, and if we called one, he would say go to the hospital, so I went there first. The nurses didn't seem to know any doctors to call, and it made no difference to me which one. Anyway, she called several. None seemed to want the call. The doctors told the nurse to call someone else. They evidently wished not to be disturbed from their turkey supper. Finally, she got a doctor to halfway promise he would come to the hospital. We waited quite a while, and he actually made it. Them nurses were irritated and cross. Ye gods, I never imagined a nurse being like that, and their attitude toward a broken wrist. The nurses were provoked at the doctors and took it out on me. Anyway, I learned to do things with my left hand. Sure wrote some fancy letters to the sailor. David was called to leave the day after Christmas. His choice was to serve in the Navy and was expected. When he left, I was still carrying my arm in a rag hanging from my neck. My husband began coming home once a month instead of every 2 weeks. The money April and I lived on was the income from the flock of chickens. I told him when the hens stopped laying I would need some money, but not right then. Rick began to complain about his job. I suggested he quit, but he continued. One night, when I was alone, I decided to call Rick and ask him if he was coming home. On second thought, I knew he might think it bad news. Anyway, I'd tell him everything was okay. He hesitated and said he didn't know he may. When he got there, he was provoked and said, "Don't call me anymore. Do you know what I thought? That one of the boys was killed." I never called him again. The next time he came home was the beginning of almost 2 years in the insane asylum for me. How did it begin? With a quarrel. It was in the autumn. The chickens were on their molting strike. April and I were no longer receiving sufficient income. I knew I must ask Rick for money. April needed money to go to school. He pulled out 50 cents and offered it to me. It sure provoked me. Then he pulled out a $5 bill and said, "I suppose you want this." I said, "That is just what I want." He hesitated, but did give it to me. Then he held up a $10 bill and said, "You would want this." I said yes and demanded it. He was furious because he thought I would say no. I was plenty aggravated, fighting over money. I handed the $10 bill to my daughter and said, "Get rid of it." Now he began to argue and quarrel. I wondered what was the matter with him. He said, "You think you're God Almighty." He kept up the jamboree, saying, "Pretty soon you'll be seeing things in the cornfield. Didn't I tell you it started with a quarrel?" He said, "You are crazy. I'm going to go get the sheriff." We never hit each other or threatened to. I didn't believe him, but he sure did. The next morning, he was gone quite early. April was nervous about it. I said, "Don't think about it." He told me later he went to the local hospital and they had no room. Suggested he take me to the Topeka State Hospital. So he went through the necessary procedure to get me there, implicating doctors, lawyers, and the judge. April and I were walking along the road, and here comes a car driving slowly. They were talking to each other. I said, "April, that's them Jones brother doctors. What are they gawking about?" Anyway, they turned around in the road and went back to town. After a while, here they come, doctor, lawyer, and sheriff. April said loud, "Gee, this is pretty good. Get into a fight and go get the sheriff." She really rolled it in. They got mad and said, "Young lady, be still. Don't want to hear another word out of you." Every time she started to say anything, they shut her up hollering. Anyway, they began to think up something to write down. Rick didn't seem to know what words to say. Doc got sort of peeved and said, "We just can't say that she is sick. We have to write some words down for the judge. After all, he has to sign it." I never told them we quarreled. Rick sure never told them. When they had written what they thought would do, including the words that were said when we were arguing, etc., etc., I didn't know what they were doing. I thought they were trying to get me to go to the local hospital. Well, anyway, when they got enough written and their faces plenty red, they said, "You are insane. We are taking you to Topeka." I said, "Insane? I am not, and I'm not going." They coaxed. The lawyer said, "My wife has a nice dinner fixed for me, and here you are keeping me." They got steamed and said, "If you don't come on, we're going to put the handcuffs on you." That scared me. I knew I was done. I said to April, "You have to go with me," and she did. When we had gotten about halfway, we had a flat tire and did not have any spares. So the deputy went to the nearest house and called the sheriff, who took me the rest of the miles to the stone walls and stacked bricks. I said to the sheriff, "And you think I'm crazy?" He never said a word, patted the steering wheel, and gazed down the road. When we got there, the sheriff said, "This is it, isn't it?" and turned into a drive. There along was a number of brick and stone buildings. He stopped in front of one, and I had a sinking feeling when I got out of that car to go in there. I said, "And I'm supposed to go in here?" We walked into the building. There was a very unpleasant-looking woman behind the desk. She spoke first, saying, "Who is she? What is her name?" They didn't speak right up, so she talked louder. "What are the charges?" By the time here came a nurse and took me to a room in that building. She said, "I guess I'd better shut the door." She shut it, also turned the key. Late that next morning, she unlocked the door, saying, "We almost forgot you. You haven't had a thing to eat, and I don't know if they will leave you here." I asked some ladies if they knew where the water was. She said, "Come with me and I'll show you," saying, "No one could bring you here." They couldn't. The ladies were very kind to me, and I told them so. "We want you to stay here. We like you." Then the nurse came saying, "You are going to another building." A lady said she would ask if I could stay there, but they refused. Those ladies were worried about me. I said, "Promise me you won't worry." One lady threw up her hand saying, "She doesn't know. She doesn't know," and went into her room. We started walking to this other building. The nurse saying, "Oh, this is awful. I don't see why they didn't leave you there." I said, "I guess it don't help to worry." She took me back into a building called the Extension. Windows with bars on them, doors keyed. I can hear them dangling them keys now. There are plenty of keys swinging around an insane asylum, and unjustly so. The nurse said, "This is your bed, undress." I said, "I'm not sick." She said, "Undress." I was scared, and I did. They brought me liquid medicine in a small glass on a tray. Awful tasting it was. And there I remained in bed. She would not permit me to get up, but brought me the bedpan. There was no way of calling her, only hollering when I wanted it, and time she never heard me all day. Maybe you think them nurses weren't peeved after I held it as long as I could and did it in my bed. They kept doping and doping me. I made up my mind I wasn't going to take any more of that medicine. So when they brought the medicine, I refused to take it. I said, I don't need it and I'm not taking it. I spilled the stuff. She said, I'll call them in. And I said, call them. And she did. In a few seconds, in came 3 husky men. They had handcuffs. I put out my hand saying, I'd rather be me as you. And with the same deep red faces, they placed them laying me in bed, fastening each hand to the bedside. They also put ankle cuffs on me, fastening my feet to the foot of the bed. It was terrifying. Yes, reader, I took the medicine. Days and days I lay there, the bed wet with perspiration, and from turning my head, which was all I could turn, my hair became a solid mat. It was never combed. If I could have moved my hands an inch, it would have been wonderful. A woman fed me with a spoon. I begged the nurse for water, and she would not give me any. My lips were cracked. The cuffs were wearing places on my wrists and ankles. The food was terrible. Bloody liver boiled and thickened. Some kind of pudding with a peculiar medicated taste. I refused to eat, and them feeding it to me with a spoon. In the evening, in came a doctor with some nurses, stuck a tube down me and poured milk in me. One nurse pulled on my hair, the others put their weight on my arms that were fastened to each side of the bed. Yes, reader, I ate after that. I later became very hungry. Would have been most happy to eat the hardest, stalest piece of bread or anything, but they refused, saying what's on the tray is all, which was a very small portion. They probably fed me tonic, which caused me to be extremely hungry. It was hell. Death would have been a glorious thing. One day, while I was still shackled hands and feet, there stood April, my daughter. I said, April, how did you get back here? And she said the gate was open and I just walked in here. She was shocked. I said, April, you know they have a humane society. She said those cuffs are wearing your wrists and ankles. I said, please get me a drink of water. She asked the nurse, but the nurse would not let her give me any water. One night, lightning struck the tile roofing on the dining hall. It's all right for nurses to rave, be mean, impatient, but the prisoners know better than to do that. April told relatives it would be better if I was dead after she'd seen me shackled hand and feet. They thought she was awful, to say the truth. The nurse one morning brought in big shears. I said, what are you going to do? Cut your hair off, she said. Now my hair had never been cut at any time. I begged her to let me comb it because I had lots and lots of time. She said no and whacked it off. The nurse, excited, came in saying, your husband is here to see you. She got me out of bed, leaving the handcuffs on me. She took me to a room up in front of the building. When she first said he was there, I asked her if I had to see him. I didn't want to. She said yes. Oh, I thought when he sees these cuffs, he will think I am violently insane. He put his hand on the cuff. I said, don't think anything about it. He said, well, if you don't care. I said, let's talk about something else. In a very few minutes, the nurse came and got me. I was glad indeed. I don't know the number of days it was before I was completely unshackled. First, they let my hands loose and later my feet. Then I was allowed to sit in the hall along the wall, sit and sit, nothing to do. My sister came to see me, and they evidently allowed her back there, or else she just walked in behind someone. It was at noontime. They told her to get out. It was dinner time and she must leave. She said she was staying until after mealtime and did. They gave me a tray, and she said, now be sure and eat. I said, you taste it. So she did and said it was horrible. I'm going to get you out of here, but she never got it done. I said to her, there is just one thing. Now tell me, how do I seem to you? What do you think? Do you think I'm crazy? She said, no, you're all right. Oh, it's awful. Later, she came back and said they're going to give you treatments. I said, what are they going to do? She said she didn't know, but she was going to stay there and watch them. The nurses proceeded to get me prepared for the treatment, gave me a bath. Oh no, I couldn't wash myself. They must do it. Slop soap in my eyes. I said, I can do it. She said no, washing my hair, rough as heck. She put shaving soap lather on each sides of my temple, and with a safety razor shaved off the hair. Then she put a slip on me, and I sat along the wall in the hall until the nurses said, "You are next." She tried to assist me walking, and I said, "I can walk." I went into a room in the front hall. There they were, 2 or 3 doctors and assistants and nurses. I stepped on a high stool, laid on a bed with rollers on. They put the sheets over me, all but my head. Then they stuck a needle in my right arm at my elbow. The fellow at the head was sponging my temples with a liquid solution. Then he adjusted something on my head, which felt like an iron guard. In a few seconds, my eyes felt like heavy balls rolling. The heartbeats were louder and louder into a pound. A fellow counts, then he snaps something, and that's all. Then I was wheeled out and some men laid me on a bed. The reason I know this is because I watched others later. Anyway, approximately in a half hour, I woke up feeling like I was frozen and with a terrific headache. After supper, my headache seemed some better. They gave these treatments twice each week. Now, I don't know how many times I was knocked out, but it was a number of them electric shocks. I sat on the stock-fenced back porch and embroidered most all the time when I wasn't sweeping or scrubbing. Those buildings are rock of ages. I sure had plenty of time for concentration and observation. These sane people dumped, rejected, and oppressed. It takes a good mind to take it. I would leave my embroidery piece lay on a vacant chair. Next thing, it was gone. The nurse took it, wouldn't give it to me for days. I thought it was in the way, so I stuck it under the chair, and she still fussed about it. I finally got the point she was afraid someone would steal it. So later on, I left money in the showers just to see. They never took it, or anything. There was no toilet paper, only on rare occasion, or toilet soap. Of course, it was wartime shortage on things, I suppose. Sitting on that porch was a small lady who had been severely burned. She would cry and cry for her 2 twin boys and ask me to rub her legs. Grandmothers pushed around. Fear is the ruling force. I always said that the greatest enemy was fear. Yes, reader, they bring them there on stretchers. Now swallow that one. On Sunday, the superintendent would walk through, his hat in his hands in front of him, and say, "How do you do?" I'd say, "How do you do?" Some doctors would throw up their hands and say, "Don't ask me." The woman doctor did the same. She did say to me, "Pearl, you were so sweet. You belong to us." I sure didn't know what she was trying to say, but figured it out later. They took me to another building, called it a cottage. The floor was tile. It could have been silver or gold for all I cared. The beds were in a large dormitory. We went up sort of an incline to the dinner tables. It reminded me of a hog chute. There I saw a few persons with the mentality they were born with. Their people tired of them and dumped them. Then I learned the woman doctor was in charge of this building, who said I was so sweet. She should have stayed for dinner sometime or any of the meals. A few very small portions of food was slopped into individual dinner plates and set on long tables. Deplorable conditions. The woman attendant was not physically or mentally capable of her job. All she wanted to do was give them hell. For instance, she would show them how to scrub, and they did it just the way she said. She would begin having verbal fits. Those poor people. She never liked me, you know that? Well, they would all be lined up to take a bath, all stripped, waiting for them to cut each one's finger and toenails. Nurses hollering and yelling for no reason. The showers, hot water or icy water, anything. There was a plump blonde nurse at the desk one day. I noticed there were several patients about her. I wondered what they were doing. Pretty soon I heard someone call my name. Now those treatments had caused me to be hard of hearing. Anyway, I did hear her call, so I went over to the desk. This nurse had large scissors in her hand, and she opened them, raised them at me, and said in a furious voice, "I could stick these clear through you." I stuck out my chest and said, "Go ahead." She settled in her chair then and proceeded asking them if they wanted to go to the dentist. That was that. Later, I was passing the woman doctor, and she paused and said, "What is this I'm hearing about you?" I looked at her. She said, "Oh, I am so sorry." I said, "And you believed it." She said, "What am I to believe?" I never said anything else. Remember, I had learned to be a prisoner and they don't talk, because they were always wrong. I knew that. Soon the nurses were getting my belongings together, things I had never even seen. Two young men escorted me back to the building I had previously been in. I thought, the jig is up, it's shocks for me again. When I got back there, they never questioned me or anything. However, it was some time before I convinced myself they were not going to knock me out with electric shocks. I was permitted to wash dishes and scrub floors and always embroidering all the spare time. Then I got news David, my boy, was coming home from the Navy. He came to see me. He wanted to see my room, so we walked to it, just a short way. He sat on the bed to see how comfortable it was. Then we went back towards the visiting room. He saw the piano. He went over to it and played with one finger the Marine song. The nurse bawled us out and said, "Get back into the visiting room." We did. She never did like me after that. Waited her chance to say something. So she walked by my room. I had my embroidery piece and skeins of floss on the bed, which I had neatly made as usual. She said provokingly, "Don't put your things on your bed. You're not supposed to." She walked past many times before, and all she said, "You're busy," or "hello." The ladies told me how delighted they were to see David and him playing the piano and things. Gee, it was grand. He said he was going to get a house and take me home. I knew it would be. In the meantime, they slung my clothes together and I was changed to upstairs. This was very much better, fewer people. I was there 2 weeks. When I was starting to wash dishes, someone said, "Come on, get ready, you are going home. Don't finish the dishes, come on right now." They put my stuff on top a large carton. I boosted it up on my hip and started down the stairs. I looked down, and there Rick was doing business transactions at the office. I said hello. He looked up and continued. I got down the steps with my heavy load. I should have given the box a shove with my feet. Out would have flown leaves I had gathered from the trees on rare occasions while we walked in formation on the cement walk. How I would like to have left there on my own merit, but according to rules, I was under his guardianship. We came to Wichita. His attitude toward me was awful. Now, I knew he had another woman before we had the quarrel and he got me put in the asylum. I asked him about it. He said maybe he did have another woman. He never gave me any money for clothing for a year. Then he gave our daughter $10 and said for her to buy me some cotton house dresses. She took the money and promptly gave it to me, and I bought the dresses. I washed clothes on a board for a year, and we had a washing machine in Emporia he could have gotten. I was sewing by hand, and I suggested he get our sewing machine. It would easily go in the back of the car. His reply was his mother might want to use it. It's still in Emporia. He took 2 trips out of the state this summer and never took me. It was months. I had never been inside our car. We never went anywhere together, not even the grocery store. Labor Day, he said he was working straight through. I knew he wasn't. I got on the bus, went to the station, and it was all closed. Our daughter sternly told him about another woman, but he never denied it. Anyway, after a year, I obtained my civil rights and I promptly sued for divorce, which was indeed a great privilege. I am now looking for a job. And if them closed gates open to those people, it will all have been for a great purpose, though tragic. And that is the end of Pearl's essay. Was she actually mentally ill, or was she sent to the mental hospital by a husband who didn't love her and wanted to spend time with and money on another woman without his wife getting in the way? During this time, it was still incredibly easy for men to have their wives committed, often on just their word that the wives were too emotional or she just isn't acting right. It sounds as though there were stipulations after Pearl left the hospital, to where she was still declared insane to the point she couldn't make decisions for herself, thus her mention of obtaining her civil rights after a year. I don't think Pearl was necessarily well educated, but I'm not convinced she had any mental illness. Her writing might have been simple, but at times it was poetic. I'm sure she was also deeply affected by the treatment she had received. and she certainly didn't deserve the horrible abuse she endured while at the hospital. I am so glad she was able to divorce her husband, and I hope with my whole heart that she was able to go on and live a happy, healthy, long life. Thank you so much for being here. Please hit the like button and leave a comment with your thoughts on Pearl and her stay at the hospital. In our next episode, we step into a story about a woman named Alice who was committed to Osawatomie State Hospital after being found legally sane. The more we uncover, the deeper the rabbit hole goes. Nothing about Alice's story is quite what it seems. Until then, stay safe and be happy.